So first off, I want to say good evening to yourself, Mr. Terry Lewis. I mean, first of all, I want to say it's an honor to be able to speak to you, because a lot of people want to know your legacy within the music industry. So let's start from the beginning. How did you actually get involved into music?
I got into music as a junior high school student. But first I got into music at home. My stepfather had a guitar that he had broken a couple strings off of, and I picked it up and started to play around with it and rather liked it. But then through school I played saxophone, and I started taking lessons during classes in school for bass guitar and also saxophone. And in our school system, you know, in junior high, it was a mandatory thing to play an instrument. And as we got into high school, it became increasingly more important. And in that music room in high school, I met a lot of the guys that I play with still to this day. I mean, Morris Day was involved in the music program. Andre Simone, who also played with Morris at the time in a group with Prince called Grand Central. And Prince used to come to our music room every day and kind of, well, a lot of days, not every day. He didn't go to our school, but he came to our music room and played. And we just all played. Just, it was a thing that we did every day. We just played, went there and jammed. So
at what point did it become a hobby, leave it being a hobby to actually now moving on to being your actual career?
We played music in our community. A lot of the guys that were athletes played music as a kind of a release from being athletes. We played music and formed bands and became rival bands. And as I graduated from high school and started going into college, I was in a band that we had formed. It started out as a band called Wars of Armageddon with Jelly Bean Johnson and David Island. And then it grew into what became Flight Time. And Jelly Bean was in that, and David was in it for quite a while as well. We had a singer that sang Funky Town, the song Funky Town, lip sync. Her name was Cynthia Johnson. She was also part of the group. Alexander O'Neill was a part of our group at one time. So it was like a hotel. We just have people in and out of the band, and we had a lot of great players. We played around clubs locally. Minneapolis was a very hard environment to break into. It's great for art, great for live music, but not for black people in terms of art and live music. So there was only a few places that you could play, and the same bands would rival each other to get those few gigs that were available. So, which was good because it made us all have to become proficient and good at what we did.
So while at that time, what kind of era was that? What decade were we in?
A decade, man. Yeah, we were back in 19 and no, it was in the 70s. Okay. We were in the early 70s when we were doing local things. Mm-hmm. Most of us graduated. Well, some of us didn't graduate, but most of us graduated in the early to mid 70s. Like I graduated 75, and I think myself, Morris, Jelly Bean, we all graduated 74, 75, and then some of us graduated 76. Competition always makes you better. When you're vying for the same position, when you're vying for the same gig, it always makes you better because the best wins, or in some cases the best of the worst wins, which is kind of where we are now. You don't have to necessarily be good sometimes, but you have to be the best of what's not good. Mm-hmm. And it pushed us all to become really good musicians. You know, in that time period, we had to learn. Like, we lived in Minnesota, so if you wanted to work, you had to learn what was available to learn in terms of R&B. Mm-hmm. So you had to be up on your R&B, but we played it sometimes for like white situations where you'd be like a bar mitzvah, or you might play at a ski resort, so you had to learn how to play country. They might come up and tell you they wanted to hear a polka. You had to learn a polka. You had to know what all the different music genres were. You play a country song, you play a little bit of everything. So it was very good for musicianship because it didn't allow you to close your mind to music, which is why a lot of people call the Minneapolis sound. It's not really R&B, but it's kind of a mixture of rock, R&B, pop. It's kind of a mixture of everything.
Now I'm looking at the list of people that you worked with. To save me from saying it, could you tell some of the audience, some of the people that you actually worked with in the music industry?
Work with a lot of wonderful people in the music industry, a lot of which you will know and a lot of which you might not know. Starting with probably our main client over the many years, Janet Jackson. We've also worked with Michael Jackson, who was probably the biggest artist of this era and probably for the next few. Usher, Mary J. Blige, Herb Alpert, who you probably wouldn't know, but who owned a company called A&M Records, which is, you know, well known. But he's an incredible artist and entrepreneur. Keisha Cole, Boyz II Men. We worked with international artists, Hikaru Utada, who was a big Japanese artist, Gladys Knight, Patti LaBelle, Ron Isley. List goes on and on and on.
These are legends.
Totally.
Do you notice a difference in approach to the way that they did music to maybe the way the newer generation approach their music today?
Well, you know, in all fairness, I think the way that people approach music is based on their surroundings. When I grew up, you know, believe it or not, I was in the era where synthesizers were born. So before my era, there were really no synthesizers. Everything that was done on acoustic instruments. So people did music. In order to do a song, you'd have to take the instrument that you played and you have to call all the other musicians to come and play along with you. So in order to do a song, I would need, if I'm a bass player, I'd need a drummer, a guitar player, a keyboard player, and a singer, if I'm not a singer. And so we would all have to get in a room and work out whatever the details were of that particular song, which is why the personality was so well-rounded in music in that day and age. But through our era, through the 70s, the 60s and the 70s came synthesizers. So, you know, it also made it available at that time where they had drum machines, which were synthesized drums, so you didn't really need a drummer anymore throughout the 70s and the 80s. So drummers started to lose work, and it became possible through recording, because recording went from 2-track to 4-track to 8-track to 16 tracks to 32 tracks to infinite tracks, as where we are now, where you could record things yourself and be your own band, so to speak. And there's been, you know, several people that have been, you know, excellent at that. Sly Stone being one, Prince being another, that made it possible for people like Kanye and different people who record their own music. But even they now are starting to pull other people in because it just rounds the music better. But all those things weren't possible and available at first. So, you know, we use the tools that we have. I don't think it's better or worse. I think sometimes more so than the music at hand, I think the A&R part of it is worse, because I think we don't push people to be unique. I think we push people for hits, and I think the artists all suffer because they all get the same type of music. Therefore, everything on the radio sounds the same. Therefore, we get confused by it. We think that sound is a hit, and we don't allow the artists to become hit artists.
And we're saying that, but do you also feel that maybe things like iTunes and the internet and YouTube is expanding people to actually come with their own sound, where before it was only going through radio or TV?
Well, I think the things like iTunes and the internet only, it's just access. That doesn't make it any better, it doesn't make it any worse. But one thing that it does is it commonizes things. Before, in order to get a song out and record a song, you had to go in the studio. In order to go in the studio, you had to have money. In order to have money, you had to play and rehearse. And before you went to the studio, you knew what the hell you were doing. You just didn't go to the studio and start recording because you couldn't afford to. So, you know, you would develop an idea, and before you would even think about going to the studio, you would know that idea was fit to be recorded. Well, now people write in the studio, and all the time when you write in the studio, it's a spontaneous thing, which is good, but always the first thing that you write or think is not the best thing. So it doesn't give people time to develop. You know, so I don't know. It can go either way with that. I mean, what makes a professional is being able to do it on demand. So if you put somebody in the room and they can't do it, you know pretty much they're not a professional.